Linux is a popular alternative to Windows for users who are seeking to avoid copious amounts of spyware and constant prompts to log in with your Microsoft account. Getting started with Linux can often be difficult, as it isn't as user-friendly at times compared to Windows. Today we're going to have a look at installing a Linux Mint alongside Windows 10 with a popular technique known as dual booting. Dual booting is essentially dividing your disk into different sections and installing different operating systems on each. This allows you to pick whether you want to use Windows or Linux when you boot up. Dual booting can be a powerful tool for those that seek the best of both worlds, or perhaps for switching over to Linux and testing the waters slowly before diving in. Linux Mint is a popular Linux distribution that has a strong focus on making the switch to Linux easy and less overwhelming than other distros, making it the perfect choice for a beginner. It's important to understand that dual booting, if done incorrectly, can end up erasing your disk and any data that's on it, so it's best to do this on a non-critical system that doesn't matter too much if it gets erased. Old laptops and desktops are perfect for this. I also just want to mention that I'm doing this on a virtual machine inside my desktop. This is just for the simple reason that it's so much easier to record for YouTube. There may be some things that are slightly different because of this, but I'll be sure to mention anything that comes up. To install Mint, you're going to need a USB drive, preferably around 8 gigabytes, with nothing important on it, your system, and that's about it. So let's get started. To start off, we're going to need to download the ISO file for Linux Mint. To do this, just head to a web browser on any computer. Just search for Linux Mint, and there it is. Just hit the download button there, and then from here we're going to need to choose our flavor of Linux Mint. There's three that are offered from the website here, so we've got cinnamon. This is pronounced mate, it's not mate. It's actually I believe it's a cocktail or something like that. It's pronounced mate. And XFCE. So these are different desktop environments. Cinnamon is generally the one that you should choose as a beginner. It's the nicest looking one. It's got the most features. It's the easiest to use for beginners. Mate is sort of more stable. It has less requirements. It's more minimalistic. It doesn't have as many features. And XFCE is even, so if you've got a system that's like a potato, you might want to have a look at Mate or XFCE instead of Cinnamon, as they're a lot less resource heavy and you're probably going to get a better experience. So we're just going to hit download on this. There's a few options here. We're just going to pick the mirror that is closest to me. Probably, there we go, that one will do. And just going to chuck it in my downloads. So the file for the cinnamon flavor is 2.8 gigabytes, so depending on your internet connection, you just need to wait for that to download, and I'll see you guys when we come back. Okay, so now that we've got Mint downloaded, we need a way to put this on our system with Windows. So to do this, this is where you're going to need your thumbstick or your USB drive. We're also going to need a program to write this ISO file, this disk image file here, to the thumb drive. So there's a few that you can use. If you're on Windows, there's a program called Rufus, which is a little bit less user-friendly than the one that I'm about to show you. That's a good one. That's only on Windows, I believe. The other one that I would recommend, if you just search Balena Etcher, just hit the download link there. It's just a little bit user-friendly, less confusing than Rufus, just for people who are starting out. There's less options, and it's just easier to use. So once you've got one of those programs installed, I'm just going to use Balena here just because it's really easy for the beginner. But if you want to use Rufus, there's a million tutorials online and it's pretty self-explanatory. You can just go through it and work it out pretty much. So we're just going to hit Flash from File, find our Linux Mint ISO file, and then select targets. This is going to be your USB. Now it's really important here that you only select the USB that you're using for this. There are other drives here. Oh, that's a virtual thing. You might have other drives listed here, maybe other USBs or drives in your system. If you choose the wrong one, it's going to erase it, and then you're going to lose all of your data. So it's really important that you pick the USB. This is also why it's important that you choose a drive that you don't need the information on it, or that you back all your stuff up first, because when you do this, it will get erased. You won't have any of your stuff there. So either go out and buy a new one. You could have one that you use just for flashing OS images, or you could maybe find an old one around the house. But yeah, just make sure there's nothing important on there. Just select that one, and then just hit flash here, and it will go through and do that. I'm actually not going to do this. I'm going to do something a little bit different with a system called Ventoy. This is a little optional thing I'm just going to go through quickly. So Ventoy is great if you do this sort of stuff a lot, if you do a lot of installing operating systems and that sort of things. I would really recommend Ventoy. So it's a boot manager pretty much for a USB. So you download Ventoy. It's probably a little bit more advanced, so a lot of you could probably skip over this if you're just a beginner. But basically, I'll show you how it works a little bit later. But you just download Ventoy, run it, and it will install itself on a USB like I've got this one on here. And then you can basically just grab your ISO images, put them on the USB there, and then when you plug it into a computer, it'll give you a list that you can choose from. That way you don't have to rewrite a whole new USB each time, and you've got all your stuff there ready to go when you need it. So I'm going to do that, but if you do it the other way, it'll be the same process, and I'll just explain it when we get to it. So once you've got your USB file ready to go, there's one more thing that we need to do before we go installing things. So at the moment, the way that your system probably works is you've got your hard drive or your SSD, and that's full of Windows. So that's all Windows, and there's nothing there that's called unallocated space. It's all taken up by your C drive and your Windows operating system. So it's all going to be in this one here. So what we need to do is shrink that. So you've got space to install your Linux Mint installation. So we're just going to go down here to the search creates and formats, hard disk partitions. Oh, whoops. It'll take a second. And here we go. So there might be a whole heap of options here. These are just your different drives on your system. So things like this is my USB that I talked about earlier. That's there. If you've got like some other hard drives, they'll be there as well. But this is the one we want to look at. So the one that says Windows C drive on it, that's the one that you need to be looking at. So these are what are called partitions on your drive. That's basically just your drive divided up into these different sections here. These are both part of Windows. You don't want to delete these. These are quite important for the operating system. So the one that we want to touch this time is Windows, which is just the C drive. So we can just right click on that one, and then you'll see the option here, shrink volume. So we just want to hit that. It'll take a second just to have a look at it and see what it can do. And now we're going to enter the amount of space that we're going to shrink in megabytes. So this is a little bit confusing. You just got to take your time to get your head around it. So we want to shrink this drive. This is currently 50 gigabytes on this drive. I'm going to shrink it down to probably 30. So we're going to shrink by 20 gigabytes, which is 20,000 megabytes, I believe. Yep, so that's 30,000 megabytes here, so that's 30 gigabytes. If you're having trouble with the megabytes, gigabytes, all that sort of stuff, you can just look up gigabytes to megabyte or something like that. There we go. You can just chuck your numbers in here, work it all out. Just make sure that this is okay before you hit shrink. You can't really mess this up too much. If you try and shrink it too far, I think it'll kick an error and you won't be able to shrink it. Just try and make sure that you get it right the first time though. So we're going to hit shrink. And there we go. So now we've got these two Windows things here. We've got our C drive, which has gone from 50 gigabytes down to 30. And then we've got all this unallocated space here, which is awesome. So we can put our Linux Mint installation here and we won't have any problems with the Windows interfering or anything like that. Okay, so from here, you just want to go down here, eject that USB from earlier. Take that one out, and then you just want to go down here and just power off the system. Okay, so once your computer's off, you want to plug that USB drive back into the computer, and then start the computer up, and hopefully you should launch straight into the USB, the ISO file. If not, I'll talk about that in just a second. I'm just going to restart here because I'm in a virtual box. So for you, you'll probably have to shut down, plug in the USB, turn your computer on. I'm just going to hit restart. Okay, so if it skips past the USB and it goes back to Windows, you need to access your UEFI or your BIOS to change the boot order. So most computers will have a key or like a hotkey on the motherboard that, on the keyboard that you can press while you're loading in. My one happens to be escape. So I'm just going to hit restart as we're loading in, just after it shuts down, sorry. Just going to start spamming escape. And there we go. So that's my UEFI. Your key may be F11. They usually delete. It could be F12, could be F1. There's a lot of different combinations. Sometimes it's a combination of escape and F2 and that sort of stuff. So you just need to look it up. Just do a search online for either your motherboard model or your computer model, and then UEFI, and it should tell you how you can get into that. So once you get in here, they're all going to look different. So it's probably going to be different to what I've got here. You want to find something that says boot manager. So this one just here. Go into that and you can see all your boot options just here. So you won't have as many as this. You probably have Windows Boot Manager. There might be one or two others, but you want to find the USB. So this is my one. That's the name of the USB. If you've got like a SanDisk USB, it'll probably be called SanDisk something. This is a verbatim USB, so it says verbatim on there. Just depends. You just got to find the one that's there. Once you've found it, just hit enter and it'll boot into the USB. So this is where I get to that Ventoy thing that I mentioned earlier. Because I've got Ventoy running, you can see I've got a list of different files here, and I can choose which one I want to install, which makes it really easy if you do a lot of this sort of stuff where you're hopping around with different operating systems or different computers. If you don't have Ventoy, it'll just go straight into the Linux Mint installer, and it'll say something like graphical install or something like that, or it might look like this. It's a little bit different depending on the build. So I'm just going to hit Start Linux Mint, which is this one here, and it'll take a while just to get itself sorted. And there we go. So we're launched into Linux Mint. Obviously, there's a few weird things going on here with my resolution and that sort of stuff. You probably won't have those issues just because of the VM thing that I spoke about earlier. So one thing that's really important to understand right now is this isn't installed on your computer. So this is not installed in that unallocated space that we made earlier. This is actually just running off the USB. So don't pull the USB out, that's bad. Um, this is just, it's called a live boot, I believe. So it's just running off the USB. So if you want, you can go in and use this as you would as usual. But the only thing is once you turn it off and turn it on again, it's going to lose everything that you've just did. It's going to restart up again, just like it's brand new. So what we want to do is hit install Linux Mint on the desktop here. So we'll just double click that one. And as I said, there are some issues here with the display and resolution, resolution. But I'm not going to worry about that at the moment. I'll fix that up once we've got it installed. And depending on your disk speeds and that sort of stuff, it might take a while. There we go. So this is the Linux Mint installer, which is actually really easy. Um, Linux Mint is actually a fork of Ubuntu, which is based on Debian. So the Ubuntu installer, it's one of my favorites. It's super easy to navigate. It's got a lovely GUI for beginners, graphical user interface, so you don't have to do any command line sort of stuff that's confusing. You can just go through, makes it really easy to do partitions and that sort of stuff. It's one of the awesome things about Linux Mint, the usability and that sort of stuff. So we're just going to go through the options here. So keyboard layout, most people will just be on US. There's a pretty cool little thing here where you can test like that sort of stuff. If you've got different keys and those things, just to make sure you've got the right one. Um, so this one here, this is a good one to do. It just installs a bunch of other multimedia codecs, which are things that'll let you play different file extensions. So if you've got like different weird video formats, I don't know what they are specifically, but sometimes instead of giving you an error that'll say, you can't play this, it'll just play it, it'll just work. So we're just going to hit no on this one here. This is just because the Windows installation is already there. You might not get this error, it does depend. If you do, just hit no and it'll just take a second. We're just going to go through as normal. And you've got some options here. So it's actually recognized that you've already got Windows loaded up on this system. Um, so if you like, you can just hit this one. It'll make it super easy. You can just go through, it'll install it in that unallocated space we spoke about earlier. But if you wanted to maybe install other operating systems, other Linux distributions, that sort of stuff on your computer, then you want to hit something else, and then you can actually create your own partitions and that sort of stuff, which is a good thing to get used to in Linux. So this is the thing that I mentioned earlier. We've got each of our drive partitions here. Okay, so you probably won't have this thing here. This is just because I've got that Ventoy thing I mentioned earlier. So I'm just going to go past that one. And you're looking for /dev/SDA. Now, depending on your computer, it might say something like /dev/NVMe01N or something like that. I'm not sure specifically. That's fine too. That's the one that you want. So we've got a little graph up here where we can see what's going on with our drive. Basically all this blue stuff here, which is the NTFS, that's the Windows file system that we mentioned earlier, the one that we shrunk. And then you've got this white bit at the end. So this is all free space. We've got 21 gigabytes to play with there. So we're just going to scroll down. This is the Windows C drive that I just showed you guys. So what we want to click here is free space. So, sorry, free space. So that's got 20,972 megabytes available. That is that unallocated space that we had earlier in the Windows Drive Manager. So we're just gonna click on that one, double click on that one, there we go. So here you can choose the size for the partition that Linux Mint is going to be installed on. I would leave this at 20 gigabytes. That's probably going to be on the edge of not enough space. Linux Mint does take quite a bit of space just because it's got all those user-friendly options and all that sort of stuff, pre-installed features and things to make it easier. If you had maybe like 100 gigabytes free, you could definitely split it in half. And then you could install another distro alongside and do like a triple boot system where you could, maybe have Windows and then Mint, and then maybe you could try out Arch Linux or Ubuntu or Debian or some other distro alongside these ones. So we're just going to leave this as it is for now. This one here, that's fine, just leave it that one. This is also okay, leave it beginning. ext4 is the filing partition system that Linux tends to use, so we'll just leave that as default there. Mount point, we're just going to hit the slash here. These are all sort of more advanced sort of configuration options depending on what you're trying to do, but for us, slash will be fine. We're just going to hit OK. It's just going to have a look at the disk. So for our bootloader installation, you just want to find the partition here that says type, and then it'll say EFI next to it. So what the bootloader does is once you turn on the computer, it will either present you with a list of different operating systems that it could launch into, or it'll just launch the system straight away. So most of the time you don't even see it because it just happens in the background. For this one, we're going to want to, to mount our bootloader to that one there. So we're going to do Windows Boot Manager, which is that. And then that's going to install the Linux boot manager, which is called GRUB, alongside the Windows one here. And that will give us the option of whether we want to load into Windows or Linux when we launch up. So this is just a little confirmation message here. It's just want to have a quick read over this, make sure we haven't messed anything up. Yep, all good. So we can just hit continue. And it will begin installing. So we just want to choose our time zone from here. It's pretty cool. You just click on the map here where you are. So this is me just here. And then just some details that will be the computer's login. My name is Bill Gates. Bill VirtualBox, that's fine. Password. This is a password. Obviously don't choose that password. Just gonna leave that, that's fine. Continue. And so it's installing. So you can click this here to give you a bit of information about what's going on. For most of you, that won't mean anything, so we can just get rid of that. There's a little slideshow here that you can just click through. It's got some information, just some stuff about Mint and what you can do and all that sort of stuff, just to take up some time while it's installing. But this could take a while, so it does depend on the speed of the disk, the speed of the USB, all that sort of stuff. So go and get a coffee or something like that and come back to it in 5 minutes or so and see how it's doing. Okay, so here we go. Installation has completed. So you just want to hit restart here and it'll reboot. If you hit continue testing, you'll just stay in that live environment thing that we mentioned earlier. It's just prompting us to pull out that USB that we put in earlier, so we're going to do that and just hit enter and it will reboot. And because we mounted the bootloader on the same partition as the Windows boot manager, like I mentioned earlier when we were doing the partitions, um, it will replace the Windows Boot Manager with this thing here. So this is called GRUB, and this is a bootloader. So to give you a list of options that you can boot from. Personally, I think it's pretty ugly. I don't like it. There's better alternatives, but they are quite complicated to get sorted. I might do a video on that sometime if you guys do want to see it. So we've got our options here. We've got Linux Mint. This is just advanced options like recovery mode and that sort of stuff if it gets damaged. Windows Boot Manager. So if you hit enter on that, it'll launch into Windows. And then this is your BIOS. So this is like a UEFI. So this is like a short key. So you don't have to worry about so this is like a shortcut, so you don't have to worry about spamming escape or delete or whatever it is as your computer's starting up. You can just hit enter here. It'll launch straight back into that UEFI that we spoke about earlier. So for now, we're just going to hit Linux Mint. It's going to launch into that. There we go. And here we go. So this is your Linux Mint login. So just hit the password that we made. So just enter that password that we made earlier. So it's going to have a little startup sort of thing here, but before we do that, I'm just going to go in and fix my display here. Okay, so let me just get this back up. Yep, so this is what will come up when you launch Linux Mint. It's just got some info there. You can just hit Let's Go. This is just a bunch of applications that are quite useful, so you can just click Launch. It's just basically getting you to have a look and go through each of them. It's basically just a bunch of links and things that you can use to help you get started. I'm just going to close out of that, and here it is. This is your brand new Linux Mint desktop. Now, one of the first things that you're probably going to want to do is just connect to a network. Because I'm running inside a virtual machine, I'm already connected, I'm all good to go. But for most of you down here, it'll say you're not connected, so this is the network settings here. I don't have access to a wireless sort of configuration thing here just because of my virtual machine setup. But for you, you'll probably have wired, then you have wireless, and you'll have network proxy. So you should be able to just go into wireless if that's what you're on a laptop or something that you're using Wi-Fi. It'll list all your Wi-Fi networks. You can just connect to them through there just as normal. And then you can get started on installing some updates. So as you can see, it's quite similar to Windows, which is the reason a lot of people like Mint. So you've got your taskbar down the bottom here. Yeah, you've got your pinned apps along the side here, and then down here you've got sort of like your system information and your volume, the time, all that sort of stuff. Over here you've got this start button here, a bunch of different applications that are pre-installed. Um, so what we're going to do, because we downloaded that file off off the Linux Mint website, it's probably not outdated, but some of the things that are in the installation will have been updated and sort of redone since then. So it's important to make sure that your system's up to date. Now, Mint does have a built-in update manager, which you can access down here, which is this little one just here. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure you can just search, yeah, update manager just there. Otherwise, just hit that there. It's got a little bit of information. And so it wants us to update the update manager. So we're just going to do that quickly. For some things, you might need to enter your password. This is the same one that we made when we installed Mint. It's the same one that you logged into the account with. So we go, now that we've updated the updater, there's a bunch of different things here that it wants us to update. So these are called packages. So the way that Linux works is you have your Linux distro, and then on top of that you install packages. So for example, most of these things in here, they're all packages that you can install. So if you like, all of these should be selected by default. You can just hit install updates, it'll do it there. If you want to do this through the terminal, which is the way that it's usually done on Linux, so you just hit terminal down the bottom here, and this is your Linux terminal. So this is where a lot of Linux action happens. So in here, we're going to type sudo. So sudo basically gives us root privileges. So the way that Linux works is there's something called a root user or a super user, which has access to basically everything on the system. And then underneath that, there's different users. So like this is just a standard user account. So we can't perform root actions such as applying updates unless we use this command first. So this is what allows us to update the OS. So the reason that we don't run as root all the time in Linux is because it gives us access to all of the system files, everything, and you can really do some damage if you don't know what you're talking about, or perhaps you get hacked or something like that happens. And the root user has access to basically everything on the system. It's sort of like Windows with the administrator privileges, that sort of stuff. But for this, we can just do sudo. That will give us root privileges. Then we're going to go apt. So apt is a package manager. Sorry. Apt is a package manager. So what that does is manages basically all of this stuff in here. So these are all packages. And apt basically, it's a repository, so you can install things from apt. And it just manages everything on your system. It's super easy to use. So just sudo apt. And then we want to go update. And then hit enter on that. So we just have to chuck in our sudo password, which is the same password that you set when you installed Linux, when you logged into the account, all that sort of stuff. Depending on how long ago the website ISO was updated, you might have heaps of stuff here, you might have not much. It also depends on your internet connection. So what this is doing is basically just going through, seeing what packages need to be updated. These links here are the mirrors that the packages get downloaded from. And then we want to go sudo apt sudo apt upgrade. So this is finding what needs to be updated, and then upgrade is actually running the update. So we're gonna add sudo apt upgrade. This is just asking us if we want to continue. It'll tell you how much disk space is going to be used. Just hit a Y there and yes. This one could take a while as it installs, downloads, and then installs each of them. So we're just going to let that run through. Okay, so say now we've messed around with Linux Mint for a little while. So we want to go back to Windows. So what we're going to do, we're just going to restart the computer here. There we go. So we're in our GRUB again. So you can just select Windows from this list, Windows Boot Manager, just hit enter on that. And there we go. Back into Windows. So now you've got your two operating systems running on the one hard drive. If we go to create and format hard disk partitions on here, you will see that this is now our Linux Mint install. This is our Windows install. And these are those other two Windows things I mentioned earlier. So now you've used up that unallocated space that's running Linux Mint. And you're good to go with your dual boot system. Now, as you can probably tell, this is my first YouTube video. I would love to get into making a lot more tutorials like this. So if you guys liked what I've just shown you, if you have any tips or anything, please leave them in the comments below. Feel free to like and subscribe, all that sort of stuff. I don't want to be one of those YouTubers that just dumps like and subscribe all throughout the videos. So if you guys could just help me get started on this platform, I'd really appreciate it. If you've got any questions and that sort of stuff, just chuck them in the comments and I'll answer every single one of them, and do my best to help you out. And let me know if you'd like to see any other videos, maybe on Mint. We could do like customization. We could do different boot managers other than GRUB, maybe some prettier ones that I mentioned at the start. Just let me know. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.